So he only has a positive strength. The weakest barbarians are stronger, for instance, than the strongest wizards. So like a wizard with a 98 strength percentile is a 0. So it's the highest you can get, I believe. I'd have to look for sure, but yeah. So and then his constitution, same thing, has the best range. He's only going to have at least a +1, even at the lowest levels, can get up to a +3. His agility, while it has the same maximum score of +3, it's tends more toward the lower end, but it's still generally good. Charisma is lower, anywhere from -3 to +1. You can have some charismatic barbarians who are kind of charming. For the most part, they're not great. They're kind of gruff. Their social skills aren't the best. Their willpower is not there as much in dealing with arcane enchantments and things. They can't really resist it. And then their intellect is always very low. So again, like a wizard with a 2% in his intellect is a +1, but a barbarian with a 98 is a 0. So relatively speaking, the smartest barbarian has a lower intellect than the lowest wizard, and that's just the scales of. And I think it's actually a good way of doing it. You can't generate an unplayable barbarian. You can't, like in, let's just say, third edition, if you had a character with a 3 in its constitution, they're unplayable. It's not the case in RIN. I mean, practically speaking, -4 to your oops, that's funny. -4 to your hit points are yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. So anyways, so that's the stat ranges. And again, when the barbarian wants to make a strength check, he would add his modifier. You want a con check, agility check, dodge out of the way of something, charisma check to convince someone of something, or an intellect check to, let's just say, figure out runes on a wall or something. Maybe report that. Hit point base is something in RIN, which I'll get when I get into the combat, I'll get into details, but to determine your hit points, you add 16 plus 4 times strength, plus 4 times con, plus 4 times agility. So every class has a very different formula. Barbarian has the most, or tied for the most with a Centaur Knight, and he's just strictly from strength, con, and agility. He's purely a matter of his muscle, his toughness, and his agility is what keeps him in, out of danger in combat. He pushes on through strength, toughness, and his agile abilities. So that's what consists of his ability to mitigate damage in combat. And so let's just say he had an 8 strength, 16 plus 8, 24. If he has he has a +2 strength, it'd be 8. Say a +1 con, it'd be 4. Say his agility is 0, so that would be, let's see, 8, 12 plus 16. You have 28 hit points. And in RIN, you have 2 types of hit points. Your hit point base would be 28. You cut it in half. You have 14 prowess and 14 vitality. In RIN, you have a fast recovering hit point source called prowess. Comes back after every battle, and then vitality only comes back after a rest. So you still have attrition. You could get some battles where it only gets into your prowess and just comes back. You really have no long-term. Let's say you only take 12 damage, it would all come back into the battle. But say you took 20 damage, it would cut through all your prowess and cut into your vitality. So you might be down to like 4 vitality, but then your 12 prowess would still be there. So even a barbarian with 2 vitality, his prowess is still there. So it creates like kind of solves the issue of resting, but you also have attrition. So it works really well. It functions really nicely, and lets the game continue while still having a consequence for difficult battles. But I'll get into that when I get into the combat section on combat. All right, here are the barbarian's features. He has 3. Classes have generally 2 to 3. Some have 4, but for the most part, the barbarian has 3. The barbarian begins with athletics, fury, and might. Again, you generate these. Your bonuses are as listed here. If you had a 26, it'd be +2 to athletics. And so the barbarians, all of his features also have might, and then they'll add to certain things. So here's athletics. The barbarian gains a bonus on all attribute checks made to climb, jump, run, and swim. He also distributes his percentile points among feats of combat afforded him by his exceptional athleticism. So barbarian with an athletics, climbing, jumping, running, and swimming. He's just a very athletic, physically fit, being out in the wilderness. So anytime he goes to, let's say, He has an agility check or strength check to climb, depending on how you want to do climb. It can be done either way. But his strength is a +2, but his athletics, let's say he has a +2 athletics, it'd actually be a +4, so it's a much larger bonus. So if he's very athletic, let's say he has his athletics up to 76, it's a +3. He has a +3 strength. When he is, just say a constitution check to continue swimming, he's in a shipwreck and he has to survive for days treading water. He adds his constitution of 3 for that endurance, but he also adds his athletics of 3 because it's a swim check. So RIN has several abilities like this, or features where your attributes are kind of your skills, but in areas where the class is particularly thematically skilled at something, he's just better. So same thing with leaping. The barbarian to leap, he makes an agility check of +1, but his athletics are +3, so it's a total of +4. It's on top of so he's just better at feats of athleticism. Additionally, his percentile, in addition to giving him a bonus to certain attribute checks, he will get to buy certain combat abilities because of his exceptional athleticism, and this is where the sub-features come in. That's what I'm talking about. This is the first view of sub-features. Athletics is the feature. The sub-features are ambidexterity, Scythian, stamina, and weapon specialization. So every barbarian, even though he has athletics, he may have a +2 in athletics, he has his points distributed differently, so it makes for very different kinds of characters. So ambidexterity, it's a classic, really going back to Diablo and a bunch of other games like that. The offhand ATP. So Barbarian normally has one really powerful attack, which in RIN you can normally just make 1 attack, but with him he could have 2, so his offhand attack, if he puts it at 40, it would get rid of, even with heavy weapons, so you could have like 2 flails or 2 battle axes, and he just, it's the idea if you can fight with 2 weapons, but it does cost 40, which is, 40 out of 100. It's a big part of your character, but you're always going to have that second attack, which is a huge increase. Scythian, when a hidden foe attacks him, if the barbarian succeeds on a survival check against the creature's concealment, then he gains a preemptive free attack with a damage bonus equal to the result of the survival check. So, again, this really comes from, inspired by the Conan the Barbarian movies when he's in the temple and that big snake is sneaking up to him. He comes around and shoves, at the last minute swings around and puts his sword through its throat. And the similar thing is in the temple and the second movie, and he chucks his dagger. He goes, enough talk, and he chucks his dagger at that guy, even though he didn't really attack him, I guess. He was maybe preparing to attack. This is kind of that concept of just, he's kind of primal, and he has a sixth sense that when he's going to be attacked, and a thief's going up to backstab him, he swings around, and it's a preemptive attack. So that means, say the thief goes to backstab me, I actually swing around and attack him before. So it's again, kind of a cool, he's almost like a cat reacting, a beast that's just kind of honed his instincts. And then on a 10, it gives him +4 to the survival check. So increases the damage and increases the likelihood that he'll beat the concealment. So he's not somebody you can sneak up on. It's a cool ability. You can also allow him to make it with a ranged weapon if you want to be generous. It's really up to the DM, and that is something in RIN. The rules are not necessarily laid out for every circumstance. The different DMs are going to have different judgments. Whether you can turn around and chuck a throwing axe and draw it before you get attacked, it's reasonable. Stamina is just a hit point. If you just want to be the tanky barbarian, you can just load 100 points into stamina. It gives you 40 to your hit point base. It'll be 20 extra prowess, 20 extra vitality at high level, which is a lot. Again, you can put it in as much as you want. Weapon specialization, just a barbarian who specializes in particular weapons. He can go 2 or 3 weapons. Normally, he might pick like a melee weapon, like a war axe, and a ranged weapon, because the barbarian's actually decent at range. He doesn't hit as often, but he does still do high damage. So not his main thing. It's kind of one of his more weaknesses, but generally he's very melee heavy. But again, you could pick 2 different weapons. It's up to you if you want to split it. But yeah, just the idea of specializing. You're better at attacking, defending, and damaging with them. It is expensive. It costs 30 to 40, but again, you could have one barbarian who takes, just maxes out his stamina, just a ton of hit points, and the barbarian takes weapon specialization, and ambidexterity, and he fights with 2 battle axes. It's just totally different. Again, same athletics, same ratings, but very different way that they play. Fury is the key ability. When donning no armor, excess damage from the barbarian's melee attacks is carried over to adjacent foes. And I'm going to zoom in here. And he receives and immediate retaliation against a foe who strikes him in melee. When he sustains wounds that would fell him, he rolls Fury as a proficiency. If the check succeeds, then instead of being felled, he becomes enraged for the remainder of the battle. While enraged, he gains an extra damage die and continues to make checks to remain standing. Once he fails a Fury check, he is felled. If an enraged barbarian is still standing after a battle ends, then his rage ends with it, restoring to him a number of vitality equal to his check. The barbarian also distributes his percentile points of exceptional abilities granted him by his unmitigated ferocity. Again, he also purchases sub-features. Sounds kind of complicated. It's actually pretty straightforward. You don't want to wear armor as a barbarian because Fury doesn't function. Your excess, at least in large part. But excess damage carries over. So if I'm surrounded by skeletons and they're way wimpy, they each have five Ichor, which is like hit points for undead. And I do 15 damage. I cut through 3 of them. So I'm surrounded by eight skeletons. These are weak little creatures, very low hit points. And I attack them. I do 15 damage. The barbarian is the only class that it carries over, so he can just cleave through enemies. And he also receives an immediate retaliation. So this is where he kind of flies into a momentary rage. As much as I like rage in 5th edition, 3rd edition, I didn't care for it as much because you're like choosing to fly into a rage, but it's a little bit counterintuitive. In RIN, your Fury, you kind of fly into a moment. You get injured, so you fly into this momentary rage, and it gives you an immediate free attack, and that's how the barbarian gets his extra attacks. So again, let's just say you're surrounded by 6 skeletons. Okay, you attack, you drop 3 of them. One of them hits you, you retaliate, you drop the other 3. Let's say you do 15 damage each to kill them all. So it's a very, damage melee heavy. He wants to get right in, retaliate. And again, the concept is tied of a barbarian flying to rage is tied to the mechanics. So it makes sense, like how he functions. Actually, it fits the theme of the class. You want to play according to how a barbarian conceptually works, and it's not always the case in all systems. Sometimes those classes are kind of counterintuitive to some extent. Then also at the end, if he runs out of hit points, instead of being dropped and knocked unconscious, he makes Fury as a proficiency. He makes a proficiency check against the damage. If he beats it, which the exact rolls are down below, he rolls a d20 instead of a d10. He adds his modifier, and the excess damage is half the. So if it's 10 beyond your vitality, you would have to make a roll of 5 or higher. So you can find, then you fly into a rage. During the rage, you have an extra damage die. So if you're attacking with like a big weapon, instead of a d10 or a d12, you're getting 2d12, 2d10. So much higher damage. You keep fighting, keep rolling against damage. So there can be battles where barbarians can last a long time and can keep fighting onward, and it's kind of the fun of it. They're the only ones standing. So anyways, that's Fury. I think I've kind of explained it. It sounds a little complicated once you get into play. It's all very intuitive and it makes sense. You're getting hit, you're retaliating, and then you're carrying over damage, and then you roll to keep fighting once you don't get unconscious. Then Dauntlessness, when the barbarian is targeted by magic that affects the mind or will, such as charm or fear, he may use his fury in place of charisma or intellect to resist the effects. So this is the case. Normally the barbarian is weak to charms and illusions and things, but in this case, if he takes Dauntlessness, his sheer ferocity, his sheer toughness, he uses fury just to break free of the magic, which is, again, fills up a weakness in the class, gives you a decent check against it, but also conceptually kind of makes sense. The idea of like tossing up a mind enchantment just through your barbarian fury. Frenzy, once per battle, the barbarian gains 1 extra attack on his turn, 2 extra attacks, 3 extra attacks. So again, once per battle, he can go into this frenzy, get a bunch of extra attacks, do a ton of damage. Just kind of fits the idea of just an exploding barbarian. Hurling, once per battle, in addition to his normal attacks, the barbarian hurls an object from 30 feet, dealing d20 plus strength plus might plus fury damage to anything struck by it. Again, it fits just flying to a rage and throwing something. It's a cool idea. Kind of have other effects beyond that, depending on what you throw. You could throw something explosive. The DM could warrant that it does something else. But the option, you could let them pick up a small creature. It's not written in there, but again, it's up to the DM how he wants to allow that. Savagery, when the barbarian is wielding a selection of buckler, dagger, long spear, short spear, sling, or quarterstaff, he gains his strength as a bonus to prowess and vitality, +1 pathfinding and proficiencies, and uses survival in place of awareness, initiative, and stealth. Normally, your awareness is very crappy as a barbarian because it's based on your intellect, but you actually are really good in your survival in wilderness environments, you go into your elements. So this is kind of like for like the Tarzan, King of the Jungle, where you're just using these primitive weapons, but you're much better with them, and you're actually really, really quick in battle because you're using your survival, which is a good proficiency. Survival skills are giving you your awareness in the wilderness, your initiative, and your stealth. So you kind of it's a niche concept for the barbarian, but it works. And again, every barbarian will be different. One takes 90 points in frenzy, right, once he levels up. He's just a frenzier. The other one has dauntlessness and savagery. He's more of a refined barbarian. He can throw off magic. He's very stealthy. So you just build different concepts. Might, the last of the features. The barbarian receives a bonus to strength checks when exerting brute force upon a creature object, such as when bursting out of manacles or kicking an orc off a cliff. He also receives twice his might as a bonus to all damage rolls, and the damage dice of his weapons improve by one category. And then he also has his sub-features. So again, with might, when the barbarian is trying to kick in a door, he adds a strength check to kick in a door, as anyone else would. A warrior with a +2, ranger with a +2, but the barbarian adds his strength, adds his might on top of it. So again, you might have a +2 strength, but you might have a +2 might, so you're that much better. Or let's max it out, you can get up to +6. So feats of strength, breaking through manacles, sheer brute strength, he's just better at it than other classes. In addition that he already has a high strength, so it's just kind of pushing the archetype even further, which matches it. And then also it gives him a damage bonus. So all of his might is added, so he gains anywhere from 2 to 6 extra damage, which in RIN is a significant bonus to all of his attacks. So a big damage bonus from might. And then also just a kind of a passive, his categories of his weapons are always higher. So if he's got a D8, he's dealing D10s. If he has a D10, he's dealing D12. So again, his damage dice are higher. When he crits, it's higher. So it's just a lot of damage, a lot of brute force. Brawn, his sub-features, once per battle, when the barbarian sustains damage, that damage is halved. It's halved twice. So again, just the barbarian just taking a massive beating. You take 100 disintegration damage, which is an absurd amount. No, you've cut it down 50, then you cut it down 25, so you actually survive some absurd disintegration trap that would kill a normal person with your sheer brawn. You've defeated it. In position, the barbarian uses strength instead of charisma to intimidate. When he does this, he also adds his might to the roll. Again, normally not very charismatic, bad at speaking, but when it comes to intimidation, this barbarian uses his sheer might just to scare people. So again, he's using strength instead of charisma. So let's just say he's got a +2 strength, he's got a -2 charisma. It's a big bonus, and he's adding his might on top of that, so like a +5. So he's actually really good at intimidating people. Again, it fits the archetype. Slaying, once per battle, when the barbarian successfully strikes the foe, the attack gains his AT bonus to damage, twice his AT bonus, thrice, 4 times. So you get a huge damage bonus. It also scales as you get higher attack ratings from leveling, enchanted bonuses. You can deal massive damage once per battle. Kind of a corollary to frenzy. You can take slaying to get one really powerful hit. Killing blow frenzy, you could build a barbarian that was got a 90 in fury, he just flies into a rage, and a 100 in slaying, he just becomes a damage, he's just all he does. It's just an explosion of damage. Vim, the AT penalty for wielding a two-handed weapon in one hand is reduced by 1, by 2. That essentially eliminates it. So again, if you want to go crazy, take 20 points in Vim, 40 points in ambidexterity, and frenzy. That could be a build. So you're getting, say 2 war axes, which are normally 2-handed weapons, no penalty, and you're flying into a frenzy. You could build all kinds of cool combinations. They all fit within the barbarian concept. They can be all very different, and it all comes from its features and how you spend your sub features. So it's there's a lot of cool combinations. Next, proficiencies. Set snares and survival. There's the only proficiency the barbarian has. He has limited set snares. It is not big on proficiencies, but you see his skills from like his athletics, his might do give him bonuses on his essentially what are skill checks, attribute checks in certain circumstances. So it kind of fills in that hole. But proficiencies, again, these are all things you can only do when you have them. So they're not just generic things. These are specialized. So set snares. The barbarian can create natural traps to catch and harm enemies, such as tripwires that loose swinging logs and concealed pits. So again, you can set up natural traps. Generally, the damage sustained from such a trap is equal to the result of the check and is inflicted upon the first enemy who triggers it. So these are just general rules. If players want additional things, I could, specific traps that could be expanded content in RIN if there's enough interest. If not, just the standard, you set up a little, tripwire that you go into a bunch of spikes and you roll, you roll a 6, add your set snares of +1, let's say 7. So the first orc that runs through just takes 7 damage. Right? And you can get more creative with it. So really up to the DM and how you want to be, how generous you want to be with it. Then survival, the barbarian can build fires in adverse conditions. He can find and create shelter that protects him from the elements and denizens of the wild. He can locate water in arid places such as wastelands and deserts. He can find, kill, and prepare wild game, and he is skilled in herbalism and knowledgeable concerning the natural world. And its denizens, actually. That's must be an older file I have here. So basically, this is, again, survival skills that are extreme, basic. Any adventurer can really just do basics of a little bit of hunting or foraging or water, but in arid places where there's no water to be found, and also shelter. This is key, avoiding encounter checks. Survival checks allow you to avoid them altogether if you succeed. Otherwise, you don't really have a way to avoid them. They're going to happen in some way. So survival is like ways of avoiding exceptional hazards in the wilderness. And then knowledgeable concerning the natural world, you can make a check to know fey elementals and beasts, what their actual abilities are. So it's kind of like I guess it would be maybe a knowledge nature check and kind of a D&D, or I'm not sure how it runs these days, but you can actually know like this creature is resistant to this, or it has this ability, or it has this intelligence, or normal. So survival is kind of like extraordinary knowledge about creatures that most other people wouldn't know. Belongings, you begin with one weapon, buckler or shield, and D12 times 10 silver pieces. You can also begin with some starting magic items, which I'm not going to have those for now. We'll eventually go over starting magical equipment. You can start with some cool abilities depending what you roll. But yeah, so that's there. Advancing the barbarian. So when you level up, you gain a bonus to hit point base equal to twice the new level. So when you hit second level, you gain 4, then 6, 8, 10, 12, and that's kind of how the hit points scale in RIN, in addition to bonuses from your strength increasing. So if your strength goes from a +2 to a +3, you gain 4 additional hit points. You can also gain them through like the stamina abilities, magic items, but that's generally how they scale. You gain a bonus of D6 +4 to your strength percentile, so 5 to 10 to your strength, 5 to 10 to anything other than strength, and 5 to 10 to any attribute. So this is a standard pattern for most classes. Your core stat gets a bonus, anything other than your core stat, and then anything at all. You can distribute it. So it provides a nice balanced way of leveling. When an attribute reaches 100, its percentile caps. Its die improves from a D10 to a D12, and its excess points go into another attribute of the barbarian's choice. So strength reaches 100 finally after leveling a while. It caps at that. You get a bonus for it being capped, which would be that the strength reaches 100, the barbarian gains +1 AT with all attack rolls. That's for every class more or less gets this, but the barbarian, you also make checks now with D12s. So the die improves from a D10 to a D12. So it's an average of 1 higher. It's a range of 2 higher. You only fumble, like 8% of the time, and you critical now in a 10 or higher. So you have 25%. So when you're making a D12 for a check, instead of a D10, those are the rules. So 10 or higher, it's a crit. So like, basically 25% crit, 8% fail. So it works really nice. It's kind of makes a dynamic change in the class. Constitution reaches 100, you get 16 vitality, agility +1 defend, charisma +8 prowess, intellect, your proficiencies in your pathfinding improve. So that's just, those are actually all classes get that same bonus. And then you divide your percentile points among your features, so you're getting 46 +4, roughly 18 on average. You divide points among so you put in athletics to get what you divide it how you want. You might get more points now. You can purchase weapon specialization, and you can put the points out however you want. Then when these max out, you also get like a capstone thing. So when Fury is 100, +16 vitality, +2 damage with all attacks. Might reaches 100, +1 AT, +4 damage with all attacks. Athletics, you get 16 prowess, +1 defend against all attacks. So when you start maxing these out, It can take quite a while. You probably won't max out all of them, but again, it's a nice bonus. When proficiencies max out, you're using a D12 to roll them. The excess goes into another proficiency, and eventually, you could max them out, but now you're making survival checks. Let's say if you had 100 with D12, so again, 1 out of 12 you're fumbling, 10 plus you're having a crit, and so it's a nice little change. Eventually, if again the system takes off, I will come up with expansions beyond this for certain things. I'd like to see when multiple things connect. You can do high, like let's say when your fury and your might and your strength max out, there could be additional abilities that are gained. So there's just more dynamic ways of things. But for now, for levels first through 10, I think that is where I'm focusing. I don't want to put too much convoluted content. But yeah, the whole class is contained again on a page. The art is kind of vibrant pulp fantasy art. It's true. It's supposed to be part of the experience. It's kind of like an art book. And I will say some of this stuff, like this is basically the kind of close to the final beta stage in RIN, but some of this stuff might be adjusted a little bit mechanically, a number here or there. But for the most part, this is what the class is, the Barbarian class. And that'll conclude the Barbarian class. It's really fun. It's actually my personal favorite class. I don't think it's anyone else's that I've played with, though. They actually don't enjoy it. It's quite as much as some of the others, but to me, it's one of my favorite concepts because I have a character named Verstag who I've played a long time, and he pretty much filled out this class as we built the system. All right, well that's all. We'll probably do the Barge class. Will be the next.